Well, let's talk about our friend George Bush. And I think, just for a change, I'm going to be on George Bush's side. Now, this is, of course, just theatrical, and it's probably not any truth in it, but it's something to think about. Like a lot of things I say. When I was talking to a friend a long time ago, just about the time George Bush got elected, we both said, uh-oh, here comes a war. And we both knew, because they told us, we weren't the only ones, they knew it on Wall Street, they knew it, anybody that was watching, that something was going to happen in the USA so that they would have to go to war. I mean, they've always gone to war, and they wanted to pick up pace. And, of course, the simplest thing to say is that George Bush planned it all. But I don't think that's being very realistic, because for one thing, he's not very bright, although he might be bright and he's just pretending he's dumb. But I don't think that's the issue. I think the issue is who did really win in the Iraq War. And obviously it wasn't anybody in the USA. I mean, any normal soldier, they're going over there thinking they're killing because Saddam Hussein was supporting people that blew up their people. I mean, that's what they think. 90% of them is what I've heard. Maybe that's not true. Maybe they think they're doing it for something else. Maybe they know they're just doing it for oil. But I don't think most of the soldiers, if they knew they were just over there for oil, would feel too good about it. Because, I mean, officially there's been 100,000 Iraqis that have been murdered. And a lot of them women and children. And unofficially, probably twice as many. And how many people's lives have been ruined, I mean, that's another thing. How many people have had to leave the country and all that kind of stuff. And I don't want to undermine the loss of the Americans, but theirs has been very small comparison. But I think more than anything, America has lost their face. They've lost their face around the world, and everybody thinks, oh, those bad Americans. Of course, if any Americans are in your city, you think, oh, well, they're not right, so who are the bad Americans? Well, the bad Americans, I don't even think they're George Bush. I think George Bush is a puppet. And I think it was obvious that he was always a puppet, and it was obvious that he was a puppet before he even got elected. So, who's pulling the strings? Now, this Dick Cheney guy is obviously pulling some strings, but I don't think he's the only one pulling strings, because there is the question of the U.S. money, because we got to remember the whole thing has a little bit to do with the fact that Saddam Hussein wanted to have euros instead of dollars. So this causes a big trouble for the American money, which is, of course, the Federal Reserve Bank. But let's not talk about the Federal Reserve Bank too much. We'll reserve them for John F. Kennedy. And, I mean, it's always the banks. It's always the big money. It's always the big money playing their games. And in this case, the big money is very connected to oil. And since the invasion of Iraq, where there's been a lot of chaos, and there probably will continue to be chaos for a while, even if America does decide to get out of there. Probably even more chaos if they get out of there, because they made enough chaos that it's going to last for a while. But the Iraqis have lost their oil. I mean, you could argue, well, why should it be their oil just because they're living there? Which I would have to admit isn't a very good logical thing. I mean, who belongs to oil? Whether or not we should even use it, obviously, it's not the best stuff for us. But anyhow, right now, the Iraqi oil is not owned by Iraq anymore. It is owned by big oil companies. So then you have to wonder, well, if they're winning so much on this bloody thing, maybe the war has a lot more to do with the oil companies and their pulling strings than it does with George Bush pulling strings, because George Bush simply was being told what to do. Now, I don't know if that's any defense. When Hitler says, gas the Jews, is it his fault? Or was? That was the bank's fault. But anyhow, what I told my friend, I said, George Bush, when he's done, they're going to use him as a scapegoat. And it's happening now. Somebody has written a book to say George Bush is a murdering prick, and it was his fault that we went to war when we knew that there was no war. Mass destruction, weapons there, except for the ones that they sold them that they didn't use on the right people. I mean, the Americans sold mass destruction weapons to them so they could fight Iran, I think. And instead they took over Kuwait. And that was a big mess up. So they get a little bit pissed off about that. It's a whole big mess. It's a whole funny game. And the whole big mess is because the big oil companies want to own all the oil. Because when they own all the oil, of course, they have the most money on the planet and become the most powerful. And when George Bush goes to court, he will have to talk about this. He will have to say, well, I know that it's not good when 100,000 or 200,000 innocent people get murdered, but what can I do? And then he will explain who said that he's going to do what. And of course, then the whole system's going to fall apart because everybody's going to say, well, the whole system is run by criminals, which it is. And anybody who doesn't see that the whole thing is run by criminals is obviously blind. And this whole thing, when George Bush gets finally charged on murder, which is the next concept, that will charge him on murder, and then people will say, okay, they get George Bush in jail, or they'll probably execute him so he doesn't talk. Or, more than likely, he never will get to court. And he will be, will he be public assassinated? Maybe. Like, yeah, if he could be publicly assassinated, then it would be another outrage, and then there'd be a good excuse for the next war. But it's not going to be the brown people. I mean, the brown people did not, the Islam people, or whatever it is that we have as a stereotype for these bad people, it was not them that brought down the CN, or what was it again, the Twin Towers. It was not them, okay? They might have been involved in it. Even that I doubt. The whole thing is an upper echelon game, and it's got nothing to do with almost anybody on this planet. It's a money game. It's the top billionaires and trillionaires, and they're fucking with us, and we've got to see that they're fucking with us. And don't think that if you bring George Bush to justice, that there's going to be any justice served, because he is a puppet. And I don't think this is his defense, but you will see that if he's brought to court, they'll kill him. Whoever's in charge of doing the oil in Iraq, they will have him killed. And they do have power over the law, and I mean, they won't kill me. They'll just say I'm an idiot, and I already said at the front that I'm just trying out some words, so we can just say this is theater, and it's just a test to see if you can think that sort of thing. But really, it's not true. Everything that you see in TV is true, right? Because the owners know what you should believe. Did that make any sense? Probably not.